Okay. Oh, yeah, let's see if I have the mic here. Hi, Johan Öhman here. Oh, it's been a long time since I published any video on this channel. I think for 10 years ago or something like that. I published musical ideas I had that I recorded, and I put in some pictures from around the world, travels and so forth, and even in memory of my father. If you want to view those, please go ahead. Feel free. But the idea for this video is different though. The idea for this video came from my music life, basically, with all the people that I've met and with discussions that I've had, mainly from music theory and the fear of music theory, really. And I've learned two main reasons of fear of music theory, or excuses for not learning more about music theory. And I appreciate that, because what is important basically is that you play, right? So continue to play. That is the most important thing. But it has concerned me a little bit, those two excuses. So that made me do these actually two videos that we're going to do today. The one first excuse that I've heard is that music theory rules will limit my creativity. I want to fly free as a bird. I want to discover the music by ears and by feelings, and not by theory. It's not a theoretical whatever. And even though I appreciate the argument, I don't agree with it. That's not how I view music theory. Music theory, in my view, is I see music theory as my best friend. The friend that will give me options. It will table out options for me to work with. But what I choose from those options is totally my choice. The creativity is still there, and even I would say I would enhance my creativity. I have more opportunity for more creativity knowing the music theory than I would if I didn't. So, because it's still my ears and my choice, I would just have more options, know what to choose from. The second argument I've heard is that music theory is too hard for me to learn. It's too complicated, and I feel sad hearing that, because music theory in general is not complicated. It's comprehensive. Maybe it's not complicated. It might seem complicated if you have, like any subject, the progression in any subject depends on the pre-knowledge and understanding you have already. So, and that pre-knowledge, that's what you build your new information on and going forward. If you don't fully comprehend the music theory, then of course going forward would be perhaps difficult for that reason. And that is the main reason why I wanted to make this, or actually two videos on music theory. So this video, the first video, will take you from the notes and organize the notes into scales, and we will define scales and using concepts like full step and half steps. And then once we know the scales and we know the notes and we know the patterns, we will use the scale degree, and the scale degrees are there for us to see the commonality within each note and each scale. So each note have its certain characteristics, and those characteristics will be the same in every scale, like chord notes. And that will be the first video. And with that, then you could say, if you can play one scale, you can play all scales. Or at least if you can play one major scale, you can play all major scales. And if you can play one minor scale, you can play all minor scales. And you know the chords and how that are. And if you do an extensive chord, like the seventh chord or whatever, you know what to expect and what that would look like in the scale. So that's pretty far off, actually. The next video we'll continue we will look at each scale, how they are composed with notes, and if those notes are flat notes or if there are sharp notes. And once we have all the scales, we can start organizing these scales in a way that it makes sense, and how to use those scales. And once we have done that, we will land on the circle of fifth, which is the structure, the organization of music theory, basically, that is very central. It explains it all almost, right? It's a very comprehensive model to view music theory in. And that can help you moving forward playing. I mean, if you are play bass, or if you play guitar and you're doing arpeggio exercises to make great solos, this will really help you. Arpeggios, you're not doing arpeggios on one chord, you're doing them in combination of three different chords, maybe three different keys. And if you do three different keys, you need more chords and whatever not. So the music theory will help you with that. So I'm not gonna talk much more. This is not an interactive course in that sense. It's just a presentation. The presentation, it will give you, and it will have its face. It will give you the information. You make it a knowledge. You make learning out of it. That's your job. And if you need to pause it, if it goes too fast, just pause it, go back, rewind it, whatever you decide. If it goes too slow, fast forward it and to the place where you find it most interesting. Just make sure that you understand everything every way. The presentation, these two videos, what I do is just I provide you with information in an organized manner. So you have a certain disposition when the information comes, and it will end up on the circular fifth. And the idea is to look at that model, the circular fifth, not as a technical music presentation, but rather a very usable tool for your playing. So that is the idea of these two videos. I'm not going to talk anymore. If you want to give me a comment, please do. I would love that, and maybe that will help me be better. But anyway, let's get to it. Good luck. At the very heart of music, you have the notes. Notes are everything in music, and we play them together. And notes in different constellations will form a grouping of belonging or families. We call that a scale. In front of you, you have the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B. And you see that the C is called root note, so we define this as a C major scale. And if you were to play that, it would sound like this. You can hear that they belong to one another. If I were to change some of these notes out and play it, it could sound like this. And you can hear that those two notes that I changed don't really fit into this family. They fit into other families, I'm sure, but not to this family, not to the C major family. So these notes belong to each other because they sound good together. That's the reason why they're a scale. And we can try this also by just playing two notes. So we can play the C and a B, and then we can play a C and an A, C and a G, C and a F, C and an E, and C and a D. It would sound like this. Then if I try to play something else outside the scale, it could sound like this. That note didn't really fit this family. It will fit another family, absolutely, but not this family. Knowing the scale and knowing the notes in the scale means that you know the key you're playing in. So if you play with other people, you're playing from the same key, you would ask them, what key are we in? So we're in a C major. Good. So then we play a chord, we start playing chords, and we can play melody, and we play from the same key. And that means that we play music that sounds good. When you start to read music, this is what you would look at. You have 5 lines and you have the notes. The notes, the lines, they call the staff. And the notes are on the staff, and they are on the line or in between any line. And that will tell you what note it is. If you look in the beginning there, you have this beautiful music symbol. It's called the G clef. And the G clef tells you that all these notes that you have in front of you right now will have that position. So if you play the piano or bass, you will see this clef, the bass clef. The bass clef is placed under. So if you play the piano, that would be your left hand that doing the bass. If you play any bass instrument like I do, I would have a staff with the bass clef in front of it there. If you see the lower C on the G clef, you see that's the note with the line in it. That line represents one of the staff line, but we don't have that staff line. We just do it for that note. That's the lower C in the G clef. In the bass clef, that's the higher C. So if the notes next to the line that will be on top of the first line on the bass clef, that will be a B note. And if you go on the first line on the bass clef, the top line there, if you have a note there, that would be the A note. So and there's a difference, because if you look at the G clef, the top line there note is an F, but the top line note on a bass clef is an A. So it's the bass clef is just a continuation of a new stuff under the G clef. But we stick with the G clef. So in the music system, you have 12 notes in between any octave. Octave is if you see the C, the red C there, that is the octave to the black C in the beginning. So the notation system, the notes that we have are C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then you go to C, and C is the octave. And then it just repeats itself on and on and on and on. But in between any octave, you have 7 notes, right? But you have also 5 in between notes. They are called accidentals, if you want to use that word. And they are like a pitch. It's like a half step, a pitch half step up or a pitch half step down. Let's exemplify that with the G here. You have the note G, and you want to pitch that up to this accidental note. That would be a G sharp, since we're pitching it up. And we're only pitching it up a half step. We don't go to A, we just go to in between G and A. And that is the black key on the piano. And it says G, and then you have the symbol, like a hashtag symbol, that indicates that this is a sharp note. And in the notation system, you would find where the note G is. In front of that, you would have that symbol, hashtag. And that tells you that this is not to be played as a G, it is to be played as a G sharp. And now we do the same, but with an A, and we will pitch it down 1/2 step. Not a full step to G, but to the key in between the G and the A on the piano, the black accidental key there. And that will then be called A flat. And you have this lowercase b. The lowercase b indicates that this is a flat. And in the notation system, instead of the sharp that we had in front of the G, now on the note A, you will have this lowercase b symbol, and that would indicate that this note is to be played as an A flat, not as an A. So G pitched up will be a G sharp, and A pitched down will be an A flat. And then you come to this awkward conclusion that the A flat and the G sharp is the same note. And the question obviously then, why do you name the same note with 2 names? Or, okay, it has 2 names, which one am I supposed to use? And that will be more clear once you go in to look at scales and the different scales, because when you do, you don't have an option. If you're going to be forced to do either a flat or a sharp. But the reason is also that you have both of them is that you need them, because you have to exclude one of them to use the other. You cannot use both in most of the cases. But for now, I think it's just important for you to know that any note that you pitch up will be a sharp, and any note that you pitch down will be a flat. A term that is very often used in music when playing with each other is the term of whole step. And whole step is when you move from one note to another note. You move two notes actually. You're moving over, and you have to then include all the 12 notes, even those the accidental notes. So if you see that the G, we're moving from G to A, we're moving over the black key, over the accidental note, and we'll land on an A. That is a whole step. In Europe, sometimes you would hear tone. It will be equal to tone, but tone and whole step is the same thing. But when we move just one note in this 12 notes system between any octave, that is called a half step, or in Europe you would hear the word semitone. The semitone or half step is just a move from, in this case, from E to F, or from any black key down to white key, or from any white key to a black key on the piano. That's a half step, semitone. And if you play the guitar or bass or any fret instrument, it is quite straightforward. If you move one fret, that's a half step. If you move two frets, that's a whole step. And these whole step and half steps are important when you're defining a scale. In front of you, you have the C major scale. We're still on the C major scale, and we will stay there for a little while. If you look at that C major scale, it has whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. That defines any major scale that we have. In this case, it's the C major scale. And if you move to a minor scale, the scale would look like a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. Or as they say in Europe, they will say tone, semitone, tone, tone, semitone, tone, tone. With 12 notes between any octave, and then it just repeats itself. It is also the case for then the scales. So go back and look at the C major scale again, and you have whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, and then a half step. And then you're on the octave, right? So the pattern will repeat itself. It will just go on the same once more, and then on and on and on. Then look at the A minor scale. It starts with a whole step, and then a half step, and two whole steps. And compare now that to the major scale. Can you see that the minor scale, even though it comes in later, it will fall into the same pattern as the major scale? That's an important observation. The other observation that you should notice is that you look at this C major scale, they're all using natural notes. C, D, E, F, G, A, B. And then you come to C, and it repeats itself. If you look at the A minor scale, it also uses the same notes, just in a different order. It starts on A, but they used exactly the same notes. That would make them related to each other. So in fact, the C major scale have a relative minor, and that is the A minor scale. So the A minor scale is relative minor of the C major scale. And the reason for that is that they use the same notes, and therefore also using the same pattern. It's only that the scale from the minor scale comes in later, but from that on and forward, it would be the same pattern. And this would not reflect only the C major and the A minor. It will be the same for any major and its relative minor scale. They all have, if you look at any major scale, they will have a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step. And the minor scale, the relative minor, will come in later, and its formula would be whole step, half step, half step, half step, whole step, whole step. Now we added a string of numbers there on top, from 1 to 7, and those are scale degrees. And what scale degrees are, simply put, we put a number on each note in the scale. So number 1 would be the first note, that would be the root note. So in a C major scale, that would be C. The number 1 in a G major scale would be G. And the sixth note, as we've seen before, is where you would find the relative minor. So in any major scale, the sixth note would be a relative minor. And that's where you find the relative minor. So the conclusion is that if you can play one scale, you should be able to play all scales, because they have the same distance between the notes in the scale. But yes, it is a difference depending on the instrument. So if you're going to memorize the whole step, half step, or if you have any other measures that you can remember how to play the scale, it will all depend on the instruments. Let me give you an example, since I'm a guitar player myself. So as a guitar player, we would use the shape as you see there. So for the C major, you have a certain shape how to play a C major scale, and once you've learned that, you can just move the whole shape up. If you move that shape up a full step, you would end up on a D major scale, and if you moved it up again a whole step, you would end up on the E major scale. It's very easy though. You just have to know the shape how to take the scale, and then you do the same. You just move up the frets. And if you look at the A minor scale, that would be exactly the same reasoning there. You learn the shape, and then when you move everything up a whole step, you will come to a B minor, and if you moved it up again a half step, you would end up on a C minor. Using scale degree is convenient because it focuses on the commonality rather than the differences. I mean, you can change scales and you would change all the notes, but the distance between any notes in any major scale is always the same. The formula is the same, and the scale degree would be the same again. And that allows you to communicate. For instance, number 1 will always be the root note. So if you talk about number 1 in a C major scale, that would be the note C. If you talk about number 1 in a G major scale, that would be the note G. And in a major scale also, the note 6 is always the relative minor. So that would be true for any major scale across the board. And the same logic would apply for using scale degrees on a minor scales. But as you can see here, there are differences. There are differences in distance between the notes in a minor scale compared to a major scale. Even though the note 1 always will be the root notes, in a major scale you have the relative minor on the 6th note, but on a minor scale, in a minor scale, the relative major you would find on the 3rd note, not on the 6th note. And using scale degree, of course, then we can compare a minor scale with a major scale. In front of you here you have the C major and the C minor. The C minor is the parallel minor to the C major, and it's parallel because both of them use the same note as number 1, the same root notes, C. When we do compare the C major with the C minor, we see that the 3rd note and the 6th note and the 7th notes are lowered 1/2 step in a C minor scale compared to the C major scale. And that would be the same for all scales. Here we move to a major scale and we look at this parallel minor, the A minor, and it looks exactly the same here. The 3, the 6 and the 7 in the minor scale is lowered 1/2 step compared to the major scale. But you can also note that all the other notes between the scales are the same. And scale degree also reveals the certain characteristics for each note in any scale. To see here, for instance, we have 3 new notes with characteristics. These are called chord notes. And they're called chord notes just because those are the notes that we use to play a chord. So if you play a C major chord, 1, 3, 5 is what you're going to use. In this case, C, E, and G. You're not going to play the other ones if you play a chord. But if I play a bass and I'm going to play over this chord, the C major, I would use the 1, 3, 5 to build my bass line. That's quite common, actually. Even in a minor scale, the chord notes would be 1, 3, and 5. But if you remember, the note 3 was one of those notes that was lowered 1/2 step when we compared a minor scale with the major scale. So obviously when you're going to play a C minor chord, the difference from a C minor chord to a C major chord would be that third note. So playing a C minor chord, you would play C, E flat, and G. When confident in using the chords 1, 3, 5 in both major scales and minor scales, the next challenge in line would then be to use the extended chords. And one of those extended chords that is very common is the 7th chord. And what that is that you have the 1, 3, 5, but you add the 7 as a chord note. And then you would have a 7th chord. So you might have heard like a C major 7 or C7 or a C major 7. Those are all extended chords. To sum things up then, we have 12 notes in between any octave, and 7 of those notes are natural notes with names, and then you have 5 in between notes, notes that you can use to pitch up a note, and that would be a sharp note, or pitch down a note, that would be a flat note. We use the concept of whole step and half step, or tone or semitone as they say in Europe, to define what is a major scale and a minor scale. The major scale would be 2 whole step, 1 half step, 3 whole steps, or used the European terminology, tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 and semitone. You're back to octave again. For a minor scale, we would say whole step, half step, 2 whole step, half step, and then a 2 whole step again. Or if you use the European terminology, it will be tone, semitone, tone, tone, semitone, tone, tone. We use scale degree to focus on the commonalities between the scales rather than the differences. And doing that, we could take out certain characteristics for each note in every scale that would be the same across the board. One would be that note 1 is the root note, and it is the root note in any major scale or any minor scale across the board. We could also see that the number 6 in any major scale would be its relative minor, and in any minor scale the note 3 would be its relative major. We saw also that note 1, 3, and 5 are the chord notes. So when you play a chord, those are the notes that you play. You don't play the other notes, you just play the 1, 3, 5. And sometimes in the future when you go into extended chord, maybe a 7th chord would be or most certainly the 7th chord you will try out, and then you just add the 7 as a chord note. We compare the minor scale with the major scale using the parallel minor. So it was C and C minor, and we could see that the 3, 6, and a 7 note in any scale, minor scale, is lowered half step compared to a major scale. So that pretty much sums everything up that we have done so far. Pretty much, I would say. All right then. Hey, first video done. I hope it went well, that you got it, that you know, it shouldn't be that complicated, pretty much straightforward. Just take your time and do it step by step. Proud of you. Next video we'll look at the scales and the notes in the scales, whether they are sharps or whether they are flats, and the key signatures, and eventually then after sorting things out we will end up on the circle of fifth, and we use that as a tool rather than some music theoretical experiment. I don't know if you noticed that, but when I first introduced myself in this video, I had this slide behind me, and at the very top of that slide, if you see that, it says find the two typos. I don't know, have you? I'm not going to reveal to you what those are yet. I do that by the end of the next video. I just wanted to point it out that, hey, you have two typos here to find. Have a good one. See you. Bye.